someday somebody else is going to go look at your code and then spend 2 hours trying to figure out what you did in one line, when 10 lines would have made it absolutely clear in 2 minutes. And so those are the sorts of things that no matter what your stack is doing that you have to do.
Welcome to SaaS That App, building B2B web applications, the podcast where we share real-world stories, practical advice, and tech insights for those building or thinking about starting a tech-enabled business. I'm your co-host, Aaron Marchbanks.
And I'm Justin Edwards. Each week we bring you the stories, strategies, and insights you need to build your SaaS or tech-enabled business smarter, not harder. Let's dive right in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to SaaS That App. Today, we are tackling kind of an existential question or decision for any startup that's going to be growing a SaaS team, and that is choosing the right tech stack. So we're not talking about just simply the collection of frameworks or programming languages. We're talking about the backbone of your application, and this is going to shape everything. Developer experience, hiring, scalability, long-term support, maintenance. So we're going to get into some specific frameworks, some open stuff like Ruby on Rails. We'll wade into the JavaScript jungle a bit, maybe with some Node.js and such. Also going to get into the Microsoft stack, some modern .NET. So not just getting into technical trade-offs. We're going to be talking about team dynamics, like I said, organizational fits, real-world impact. So whether you are launching your first app or rethinking your stack for the long haul, or you just are here for some spicy takes, stick around because I suspect with this group, it is going to get a little nerdy. So to help us break it all down, joined by some fantastic guests today. With me as always, Justin Edwards, my partner in crime, CIO of Delta Systems, and our resident pot stirrer for today.
Yo.
He's going to help us kind of frame a lot of this stuff with flexibility and structure, community-driven innovation, that sort of stuff. Also with us again is Daniel Cannon. Welcome, Daniel. Our Chief Innovation Officer of Delta Systems, a seasoned Ruby on Rails developer in his own right, and a big-time advocate for open source. And he has scaled, of course, numerous SaaS products and applications with a lot of open source tech. So welcome, Daniel.
Hey, nice to be here.
And then new to the pod, we have Damon Altamore, founder of ThisWay Development. He is a .NET expert. He knows all things .NET, what it takes to build secure, scalable applications. And so we're going to dive into maybe even some things about is .NET going to be open sourced? Are we heading in that direction? Let's find out today. So welcome, Damon.
Thank you. Hi.
All right. So I just want to kind of dive right in here. I want to start high level, 30,000 foot view. And Daniel, I want to talk just a little bit, a couple of minutes here on why is open source in general, but specifically Rails, why has that worked? Why has that worked for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, nice to be back on the program. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I mean, open source, a lot of people, old school people are really afraid of open source software. Like it's open. Oh my God, the code's public to anybody. Anybody can come and hack your code. And like actually the opposite is pretty much true with open source. If something's an open source piece of software, it means there's a whole community around it. It means there's a whole process for, code getting merged back into the repo and actually having the code be public to the world makes it easier for good guys, the white hat hackers, to go in and try to find vulnerabilities in software, report it back. So it tends to actually be much more secure. It's also typically free, so that's pretty cool. I'm constantly amazed by these things where it's like there's this commercial paid solution and it's just terrible. The free source alternative is actually much better. So it's free and better. It seems like an obvious winner.
All right, all fair points, Damon. Give us a little bit on the .NET front there. Why is this a compelling choice? I know that we're talking here about maybe sometimes larger organizations or things with compliance needs, but give us the scanning on .NET.
Yeah, .NET is used mostly by larger organizations and enterprise organizations because I think for a number of reasons. One, the tool set out of the box is complete. So when you enter into the .NET world, you get frameworks right out of the box that help with security and compliance, that help with your pipelines. .NET or Microsoft has made a number of moves over the last 10 years too, that have significantly increased the usability of .NET, basically by adopting some open source methods and open source things. And .NET actually is already open source. You can download it. That's Comes with some caveats. So I think we might talk about that a little later. So I'll save that. But they've also moved to GitHub, not GitHub itself, but Team Foundation server is now called DevOps, and its default is based on Git. So that was a huge improvement from their old Team Foundation server. But I think that the tool set really, not only does it come out of the box, but it also supports larger teams. And that's a big plus as well, because everybody's working in the same environment, in the same IDE, and everything from code to pipeline to deployment is all happening in the same universe. So it's there's that. The downside is the cost, and we can talk about that as well.
Yeah, that's okay. It's actually going to lead right into the first thing I really want to talk about, which is, you get a new opportunity, a potential client comes in the door, or a project that you're going to be working on, and there is an initial component of, as I'm looking at these tech stacks, the actual fit for the organization. And Damon, I want to start with you because you just mentioned it a moment ago. You're talking about .NET and it being very scalable, good for larger teams. So talk to us a little bit about an ideal candidate or why it is that .NET might work for a particular company of a particular size or something with some compliance or security needs that .NET would really be leveraged well for.
Yeah, so I'll start with the compliance and the security needs. There's a number of advantages that come with .NET. From the code libraries, you get encryption, role-based authentication, things like that are again out of the box and really easy to implement. But then there's also a number of ways to scan the code, and there are third parties that'll do that. Microsoft has some stuff, and if you're deploying to Azure, they also will check compliance in that case as well. And then I think also when you are dealing with people who need to audit what you're using for encryption, they need to audit how you're doing certain things. A lot of times if you're using the Microsoft supported libraries, that's all they need to know, because those are widely used and supported by Microsoft.
Yeah, just a little bit about size of a development team or even size of the project as it would relate there.
Yeah, so I think also the complexity of the project you're working on has a lot to do with whether you would go with .NET, scalability as well. Once things get scaled to a very large scale, if you're deciding between something like Ruby on Rails and .NET or even other things, you can only scale Ruby on Rails so far. And I only say that because of the experience that Twitter had with it. And I think it was a good choice for them in the beginning, but once they got too big, they had to look for other technologies. So Microsoft technologies will scale to that level that's needed as well. But also separations of concerns and abstractions work very well with the .NET project organization. So if your project has a lot of different modules that you want to keep separate, and especially if the modules need to scale independently, the way that the .NET is set up and the way that you set up your projects, of course, if you set it up correctly, really lends itself to more complicated projects and keeping the code organized.
Yeah, so Daniel, I want you to respond to that, because I know we've spent a lot of time talking about Rails in terms of like the size of your team and auditing and compliance and security, but it seems to me that Rails also does have a pretty nice complement of libraries and capabilities as it relates to those elements.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely they do. Absolutely they do. I mean, I think Damon's point is really well taken, especially if you're trying to get in working with like an enterprise customer, somebody who's, gonna make you fill out a compliance questionnaire, which Lord knows I've filled out hundreds of those. I actually just got off a call doing one of those right before this. Yeah, it gets a lot easier if you can say, hey, we're using these approved Microsoft tools. Hey, we're SOC 2 compliant. That one always solves a whole bunch of questions. But it's not to say that Microsoft is in any way more secure than Rails. I don't really think anyone is saying that. But it can give you a win to just come in and say, look, we use blah blah blah, this approved thing that everyone at your enterprise knows and loves, and it's Microsoft. And people just they have a lot of belief in Microsoft being this secure company. I disagree. I think frankly, if you look at the track record of Microsoft proprietary software versus your more open source alternatives, Microsoft's had a pretty bad run of it. They're starting to get more groovy. They got this new CEO who's wanting to move things more into the open source realm. I mean, that's the direction that Microsoft is going, which I'm excited to see. I think it's great. But yeah, I mean, can you build secure software in Rails? Absolutely. There's wonderful library support for Rails. I think it's very easy to write extremely secure applications in Rails. It's actually very hard to introduce vulnerabilities because things are so built using this kind of conventional method. It just makes it really hard to add things. Whereas when you have these more complex systems like what .NET encourages you toward, with all these levels of abstraction, it actually introduces, I think, a lot of places for little issues to kind of creep in. The nice thing about Rails is you can step into a code base and understand what's going on. It follows the same convention as other projects. There's not that much that's weird, and it's in the parts that are weird, which is where your security issues tend to crop up.
To Damon's point about scaling, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but moving from an interpreted language to a compiled language is going to give you a speed boost. And I believe Twitter actually moved to a different open source technology, which was Play on Scala, if I remember correctly. But to be fair, that's also that compiles down to Java bytecode, which is it's a move from an interpreted language to a compiled language, which is going to give you a performance increase when you have problems on the scale of Twitter. So
Pedantic complaint. Actually, Java bytecode is very much still an interpreted language. It's just a compiled interpreted language. But
all right, would you agree that it's more performant than interpreted code?
Well, actually, Java was a really interesting case study because everyone was like, oh, Java's always going to be slower than something that's written in C, something that's compiled down to run in machine code because it's interpreted, and interpreted languages are slow. But actually, what wound up happening with Java was the development of the just-in-time compiler, which actually analyzed the patterns that your application were using on the architecture and recompiled in real time as you were using it. And it didn't take long before Java applications were actually running way faster than C applications because they were dealing with this interpreted world where it's not explicit machine instructions, but rather you can actually see a little bit of the intent of how the software is supposed to be used. And I think there have been a lot of evolutions like this with functional applications where you're writing functional code, you're describing the problem for the computer and letting the computer figure out the optimal solution for how to solve it. So I think that there is definitely the potential for these higher level, more interpreted languages to actually be more performant down the road. And there has also been an evolution in the Rails world of moving to using what's called Rust, which is a different language that actually does compile down to bytecode. And so a lot of key components of the Rails ecosystem these days, like Active Record, are written predominantly in Rust as opposed to in Ruby. And you always have that option if you are dealing with a performance issue, is to recode part of your application in Rust. So there are ways around it. Yeah, I'd say in general, if you want to take the Pepsi challenge between Ruby on Rails versus Play is probably going to be your more performant, your more scalable. But what are the trade-offs for that? How much work do you have to do to make this really scalable application? And is your company to that size? Does your company have millions of users, or is your company trying to get its first user? And once you have millions of users, you're going to have the budget to spend to rewrite the thing anyway.
Well, Damon has a lot of background and experience working with like insurance companies and companies of big sizes with specific and unique compliance needs. So
financial planning, yeah.
Yes. So these technologies make sense for that reason. I also think there is probably some benefit to the idea of outsourcing liability or outsourcing responsibility for things. So if you're 100% Microsoft shop and they control 100% of your stack and Microsoft has an outage, you can kind of point the finger at Microsoft and say to your customers, hey guys, sorry, but Microsoft is down and this is a very supported, very widely used thing and it's messed up right now. So it's their fault, not ours. Sorry. Whereas when you have something you're architecting yourself out of a series of open source technologies, it's kind of always your fault. I know that strikes you as accurate, Damon, or if you have complaints with it. But
oh yeah, no, we've definitely pointed the finger at Microsoft when they deserved it. But a lot of that has to do with it's tied into the cloud now, into Azure, and when they have troubles, everybody has troubles. So, but I want to jump back at the C#, which is .NET. One of the languages for .NET is also just-in-time compiled as well. But I do want to I do want to mention like security and scalability. Really, you can code in any language and in any platform and make things terribly insecure. It all has to do with how you code it. And so I think the advantage, we're not saying .NET's more secure for sure. I agree with Daniel, but I think the toolbox that you have to make things secure is there. I don't know if it's better than Ruby or Rails or not, but I've taken advantage of that out of the box stuff a number of times. And same thing with scalability. It all has to do with your system design. If you are scaling large, I mean, let's face it, the differences in performance between a just-in-time compiler and a fully compiled application is only going to affect certain niche things that you're doing. Performance right now, a lot of coders really worry about performance where they don't need to.
One more thing within this kind of realm of organizational fit before we move on to another topic is, and one thing we haven't really touched on, and Damon, I want you to kind of lead us here on this one, but something that I have fought with clients on, or I would say fought, discussed in strong terms with clients, is if they already have existing technology, if they already have an existing stack, if they have a suite of applications, whether or not you're necessarily trying to tie to them, is the technology that they already have in-house a large piece of a consideration for an organization when they're deciding what they're going to be using for this new application or new feature that they're building out?
Yeah, I think it absolutely is. Like I would never walk into a company that has millions of dollars invested in a certain technology and say, no, in order to do this, we're going to have to switch technologies. I'm a big believer in being a little tech stack agnostic. There are a number of decisions, that help you make that decision. But at the end result, they're all doing the same thing, in different ways. So there are advantages and disadvantages. Now, if somebody came in and I think what I hear a lot is it's getting slower and slower to develop, using our existing tech stack. Things have grinded to a halt. It takes forever to make, this change or that change. And I think that can happen not necessarily by the technology stack, but by the use of the technology stack and not having good design that is able to take them forward. So if I came into a company like that, we would then revisit the question: are we using the right tech stack for what we're doing and the resources that we have available, the human resources that we have available? And maybe we are, maybe we aren't. But I think that's a good question if they're having trouble with their software development lifecycle.
Yeah, and Daniel, kind of the same question, but even more focused on, because we have had situations even somewhat recently where maybe the technology that's currently being used is not necessarily best fit for this new thing or this new application or this new SaaS, even though the stack already exists for what it is that they're using. Is that something that you find a lot, or do you agree with Damon that it's something that the default position is let's stay with what you got until proven otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think in general, if you've made a large investment in your technology stack, even if those aren't the decisions I would have made from day zero, we're not going to pivot you out of that. We're not going to be like, oh, you wrote this entire thing in Node. I hate Node. Let's now do it in Ruby on Rails because that's all we do. There have to be really, really compelling reasons to embark upon a rewrite. That said, if you're just starting out your company, if it's brand new, if it's small, now is the time to make those right technology choices. And I would say, I'd love to invite Damon to disagree with this, but I would say for your typical startup, for your typical small company, you're launching a new SaaS product, I would say that .NET is probably not the right choice for that. I would say .NET is probably more for a larger, more enterprise application as opposed to a small startup. But would you disagree with that, Damon?
I think that if you need to get a prototype out fast and you have a smaller use case, like Twitter's another good example, and I think the correct choice for them was Ruby on Rails because Twitter's very simple. It just needs a lot of volume, but they didn't need that when they first started out. They just needed to get it out there. And you can for sure stand up stuff way faster in Ruby on Rails than .NET. .NET takes a lot of thought towards design. You don't have to do it, but you really should because it gets really messy. Like, Daniel was saying earlier, these weird things that you find. Generally in my shop, I don't give coders opportunities to decide what goes where. Everything is already mapped out because .NET can get really wiry and crazy and need a big ball of duct tape. But if you keep it under control, you can control the code and understand the code very well, especially in C#. And to me, that's another really important point is the cost of applications is exponentially higher after they go live. And so that comes into the decision of a tech stack as well, because if it's going to move and shift a whole lot, you want to invest in the design up front and make sure that the code is readable. Code is very expensive. And so I'd much rather see coders like to do things in as little lines as possible. Well, that's great, but I can't read that and know right away whether it has problems or not. And so someday somebody else is going to go look at your code and then spend 2 hours trying to figure out what you did in one line, when 10 lines would have made it absolutely clear in 2 minutes. And so those are the sorts of things that no matter what your stack is doing that you have to do.
Yeah, I think the emphasis on code readability on top of performance or over performance is in general the right call. People, humans, programmers are very expensive. Machine cycles are very inexpensive. So if you run something that's 10 times slower, who cares? If it becomes a performance problem, you'll find out, and then you can pay someone to fix it. But if it's easy to read, that's actually a better place to start than it's a super performant or super fast.
So I want to shift this just a little bit then. Still thinking in terms of organization, but when we're going through these analyses and we kind of have the two buckets, if you will, of an existing organization, perhaps with an existing tech stack, and we're building out some new SaaS versus a startup type situation, and we're getting into decisions about hiring. I suppose a couple of questions right off the top of my head is, when do you start to make the decision, or when do you start considering hiring in-house, having that person here versus contracting something out? And what does the pool look like? As we get into these generally two types of technologies that we're talking about here, is it easier to find one type of developer than another? So Daniel, why don't you lead us off with that one on talking about talent pool?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's a huge consideration when you're trying to pick your stack. And I mean, I think it's actually really interesting when you're talking about .NET versus Ruby or any of these open source technologies. Like when I first went to school, when I was at the university long ago, there's kind of like this expectation that people who got bachelor's degrees, those were programmers. Those were the people who implemented code. And if you wanted to be the guy who wrote the spec, you got your master's degree. So I always wanted to be that guy. So I went on and got my master's degree. And so now I get to write the spec to hand off to developers to go and implement. I mean, that was sort of the traditional paradigm. And I think that's still largely how, .NET teams tend to work. There tends to be sort of the architect, the guy who says, these are the patterns that we're following. And they break it up into little small components, little small modules, so that we can hand this off to Chuck, and Chuck maybe isn't that great of a programmer, but he can follow directions real good, and so I'm going to give him the recipe, and he's going to follow and implement it. So I think .NET teams tend to be much more diverse in terms of skill set, and they tend to be a little more heterogeneous in that way. Whereas typically if you're working like in Ruby on Rails, it is a lot easier for one bad developer to screw everything up. And there's generally not this kind of like structure to the project where you have all of these little self-contained little modules. It's like if you want to add a user show page, you go and create a file called show.html.haml, you drop it in the view folder, there's your user show page, you're done. It's convention. I don't have to wire it up to anything. It's just because it's there, it's there. So, I mean, I think in general, and there's been a lot of efforts to impose this different kind of structure. You've probably heard of like microservice architectures. They're trying to do the same thing. Let's break it off into little pieces so that when Chuck comes in and he screws up, the billing module, well, billing is broken, but everything else still works, which I would still call a pretty bad situation. But anyway, so I guess what I would say is that if you're working in like a Ruby on Rails style architecture that's much more traditional MVC and much less object oriented, you want to make sure that you're only working with sort of senior developers who really know what they're doing. One bad developer can totally poison the bunch and cause all sorts of problems. Whereas I would say with a .NET style project, it's a lot easier to work with developers at different talent levels. So that could certainly be an advantage.
I think another thing that's interesting about the .NET side, and I'll let Damon comment on this because he actually has experience as opposed to musings. But I have many musing. Microsoft certainly offers certification specifically on like their MVCs and like being a programmer in like the Microsoft ecosystem, and obviously they have like the cloud certs and stuff like that. Whereas like when you control the whole top to bottom thing, you can create your certification because you're the company who makes all these products. It's kind of like a certification and a training and all that specific to your stuff. Whereas like I don't know where I would send someone for a Rails certification. It'd have to be some third party that created it, and how much credit would I give to that? I don't know. So I guess, yeah. Do you have experience working with credentialed folks, Damon? Do those credentials, like, are they? Is it signal? Is it noise? Is it somewhere in the middle? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, it's fine. I hate to say this publicly, but I don't put a lot of credence into those because some people study for the test and they do. It doesn't make them a good coder. I think it's different with cloud technologies and networking and DevOps and things like that, where there is a lot to learn. But with coding, I don't know. I've never really put a whole lot of weight into the credentialing that they do. I think it's a good moneymaker for them. Yeah, but
I'm so happy to hear you say that.
I feel similarly about most credentials stuff too, and including college degrees. So,
wow.
Yeah. Well, in our industry, yeah. I mean that was Daniel was talking about, coming out of college, and that's a really interesting thing, and I think it's still true today. You don't really learn how to code for businesses in college or how to be on a business team. You have a computer science degree, you learn algorithms and compilers and all that good stuff, and then you get to your first job and you have to learn from scratch what you're doing. So you never see .NET developers come right out of college like, oh, I'm a .NET developer. They learned it on their first business job, because they're not teaching it in college and it's not fun. Nobody's like getting into .NET to mess around and make their little website, and as they're starting to become a coder, they're using other technologies and open source technologies. But I do agree also completely with Daniel. With .NET, it's much more structured. Like I said, you can control the code a lot better. You can enforce patterns a lot easier, or very easy, I should say. And also you can isolate your junior developers from your senior developers and have them work on other things. The other thing about C# too is it's a very, very tight, and it's very hard to get something to build that has problems. Whereas I don't know a whole lot about Ruby code, but for example, JavaScript is meant to kind of go over the bumps. And so you need to have somebody who really knows what they're doing coding JavaScript, because it gets out of control really quickly. Whereas in C#, it's not going to build. If it hits a bump, you want it to explode, and that's what you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a huge kind of religious argument among programmers for sure. And I never really know which side I'm on, because I'd spend a lot of my days working in Ruby, working in JavaScript. But yeah, type systems are super helpful. And I mean, Ruby does have types, but yeah, it's very flexible. It's like, well, if you kind of want to cram an integer into a string, have at it, or do what you want to do. And I mean, the trade-off is that your .NET application, your Scala application, your strongly typed language, you spend all of your time trying to resolve type issues. But then once you resolve all the type problems, the thing works. Whereas Ruby application, it runs, it's fine. There is no compile step. It just runs. You find out when you click the button and everything goes red, and you're like, oh, that's right. I guess that did need to be an integer, for example. So it's got a trade-off.
Even down to the level of, like, I misspelled the word exception in the exception handler, and then that exception never got thrown. So there was actually a name error in an exception handler that it wasn't smart enough to figure out that I had a typo in. So yeah, Ruby's very much on the far side of that. So Paul Graham, I believe he was speaking skeptically about Java, and I think there's a reasonable amount of overlap between C# and Java in a lot of ways. But he basically said that he found it to be a really maintainable way to write spaghetti code.
What a way to put it.
Well, not his opinion, not my own. I'm not a big fan of Java. But anyway, I do wonder, we talked a little bit about kind of like working with developers who are kind of top to bottom in their journey with like seniority. And yeah, I do wonder if some of these things like type systems and really rigid structures and things are actually helpful in kind of bringing people along their journey as they get more and more senior, whereas there's just not a lot of support for Rails, other than there's an obvious answer to everything if you know the convention, and if you don't know the convention, you should learn the convention, and that's kind of the answers we have for you.
But you learn by doing, and you learn by working with or being mentored by other developers. I mean, in either case, and certifications, as you guys have said, kind of to the side. I mean, at the bare minimum, at least it does show some level of knowledge, even if it may just be, to Damon's point, working toward a test, or to Daniel's point, having experience in or working with it in, many different forms or with libraries and things like that. You still have to show that expertise. You still have to show that experience in some way other than just showing up and on the first day, we all find out that you have absolutely no idea what it is that you're doing.
But I mean, we rock people in job interviews who have master's degrees in computer science, and we flub them up with really intense questions like, how do you sort a list? You know what I mean?
This is true.
So,
Hey, don't give away our interview questions here. Come on.
if you interview with us, I'm here to tell you better know how to sort a list. I should go,
Yeah.
that should go
or
without
at least
saying, but
start with knowing that it will at least be easier to solve if you do sort it.
Yeah. No, I don't. I mean, not to turn this into a higher ed conversation, but yeah, I don't put a whole heck of a lot of stock in educational credentials. Like, I was the golden pather. I went that route because that's what I thought you were supposed to do. Looking back at it, it's like, did I learn a lot in college? Yeah, I learned a lot in college, but yeah, lots of really smart people. Our best programmers did not go that traditional route. Our best programmer that I could think of off the top of my head got his start as a newspaper delivery boy. That was where, where he started out. Hired him to go around, start taking pictures of senior citizen centers because we were working on a project for the city of Albuquerque, and then he gradually grew and grew and grew, and now he's a better developer than I am. So I don't think that there's this need to go that more traditional route, and just because you have the credential doesn't mean I'm going to hire you on that basis alone.
But my point is, at least there is something there that shows, hey, you can at least use terminology, right? So whether or not there's a lot of weight behind it, it is a filter through which things can pass.
Oh, absolutely. All things
Yeah.
considered equal, I'd rather hire somebody with a degree than not with a degree, but that's not,
Yeah.
it's certainly not a decision criteria for me.
yeah, for our job postings, it's listed as a desirable trait as opposed to a required trait.
Yeah, I agree too. And in computer science, and especially guys my age, I won't give away my age, but I went to college around the first internet bubble burst, and or right before it rather, and so the internet was really kind of just taking off. My first email address was my freshman year in college, so that's the time period. But there were a lot of people there because advisors were telling everybody coming out of high school, computer science is where it's at. You're going to make a ton of money. That's where the future is. And so you have a lot of people that get into it, went to college for computer science, they passed the test, but they never really, I want to say loved it, but it wasn't in their skin. So they're not educating themselves as they go along. They're not really learning on the job. They just thought it would make them a lot of money. And it's a trait that you have to love, and you have to keep up with the technology. So if you weren't messing around with it in high school and enjoying it, then computer science is not probably the thing for you to do, or at least a programming path isn't the thing for you to do. And I think that's why, like David said, you run into lots of people who don't have a college education, and they're awesome because they love it.
No, that's a question we always ask on our interviews is, how did you learn how to program? And honestly, the answer I'm looking for is, I've taught myself. Those are usually the best developers. It's like, I was so passionate about this that I went out and learned it, and then I later found out I needed to go get a credential. But yeah, you got to have passion to become a programmer. And I don't really want to work with anybody who, I thought this would be a good way to make money, so I started doing it. They're not good developers.
Yeah, and you can teach them patterns, and you can teach them standards. If they taught themselves, they probably don't know it, but that's the base.
I also think there's plenty of place in the world for folks who have, who are smart enough to program and have it as a job, and it's just not the thing that they're all about. Like, I'm sure there are members of my team who kind of feel that way. Like, I have a lot of people I respect for who are like, oh, that person's a solid developer, but they're not like all about this. But that person typically doesn't become a team lead or an architect or a super senior person with a neck beard making a gajillion dollars a year. It's a lot easier to end up in that position if you really care about it.
I'll let the beard comment go there, Justin.
You have a proper beard, not just a neck beard. When I say neck beard, I mean only the neck.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I hear they're coming in style.
Oh my goodness. Well, we can hope not, at least. So, we spent some time talking about, experience and taking initiative and learning some of this. And I think that we can all agree that to a certain extent, .NET has more age on it. It certainly has, more structure. There are, I'm going to say, more things out of the box than perhaps, open source. But obviously, when you're dealing with open source, you have just a seemingly infinite number of third-party packages and libraries and extensions and things that can be leveraged. So, Damon, over to you on that. How do you handle Daniel's t-shirts?
Brings up a really interesting point. .NET definitely doesn't have Rails, but there are little pieces you can do there. When you're setting up a new controller in Vue, you can have it generate everything from a model. So you create the model, and then it'll put in everything for you. I discourage people from doing that with .NET because, and that gets back to the decision and the complexity. .NET can't stand things up as fast, but it also, in more complex applications, you want to abstract, those things. So if you're having .NET generate everything for you, it's going to couple your model to the view. And that's also why I don't necessarily do front ends in .NET either, because I want to have a decoupling between the front end. Front end should be dumb and safe, and not really know anything but how to display things and when to display it, and everything gets told to it by the API. And so I think it's really easy to, not that you have to couple them when you start doing those, but you have to be careful and make sure that you're maintaining some abstraction there. And there are a couple other points too with that. And one other point on that, generated code, it has gotten a lot better. In my application of technology, I always say, if you're going to generate code, you're going to go in and clean it up, and you're going to understand it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's what AI kind of scares me these days. I have a couple customers who are where
They're not the only one.
I'm not worried about it taking over everything, but I am worried about some really bad code getting out there that nobody understands.
So, David, you mentioned decoupling the front end for the back end and keeping the front end pretty and dumb, I think is what you said.
Yeah, I didn't say pretty, but I like it.
So, like, I mean, are you ordinarily then like writing in Angular, or because it seems like, okay, so you're typically doing it in Angular. I guess, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I like Angular. I like React too. Both are good. I like SVAs in general for front ends. I think JavaScript was meant to be the front end. Like I said, it rolls over the bump. So as long as it's dumb, it's not going to damage things by rolling over the bump. So for the same reason, I like a very tight, rigorous, code in the back end, it's kind of the opposite. I don't want that to roll over any bumps. But yeah, I do like those. I think you can stand them up faster. The problem with .NET and front ends, there's a lot of problems, but I think they're great if you just want to serve a page, either a static informational page or, that has dynamic data coming from a back end, or forms that you just want people to fill out. You can't, they're not real great at, well, as soon as you get into async with .NET front ends, now you're in Ajax spaghetti, and you just start repeating code everywhere, and it becomes unmanageable. And so what I really like about the open source single page application type technologies is there you can build all of that gook that you need to do asynchronous calls and stuff like that. You can build that in a very organized, structured way. The problem with them too is the same problem I have with every technology, is the code can get really out of control. I've seen some really crazy React apps that have the state going everywhere, and there's just multiple layers of everything just to get something to show on the screen, and so you have to control, just like everything else, you have to control the code.
And maybe my limited capacity as a person, but the way that Angular deals with data and async and structuring things inherently makes tons of sense to me, and I just think that it pushes me towards writing things that at least that I understand, or that, like, the way that it deals with state I can grok. I'm not always the biggest fan of it, but like I kind of dig it. Whereas React, I've just continually just like, why are we doing all of this? It seems like there's like 1,000 unnecessary steps that I'm required to do something like show a label on a button, and I just for the life of me don't understand why people like it. Or I guess the main thing that I'm into React on is that it's great for cross compiling mobile apps. So if you want to deploy to Android and iOS and have a single code source, that's fantastic. And React Native, I guess, is the language that does that best. But I keep checking in every so often on NativeScript and Angular, because I would much rather work with Angular than React. So is the .NET core or the .NET ecosystem pushing you directly into Angular, or what is that functionally like when you're starting a project?
I have the same thoughts as you. I think React has a number of extra steps for some simple things. I have yet to see a really good organized React app. I've seen some that are better than others, but Angular I like for that reason. And then also with Angular, you can I like to compartmentalize everything, and so you can do things in really discrete controls and reusable controls very easily in Angular. It keeps things nice and organized and neat, if you adhere to that kind of stuff. So I think that for those reasons, I push towards Angular, and SVAs stand up so much faster than MVC. So I kind of steer anybody away from .NET front ends unless they're like, you know what, all I need to do is show this piece of data from the database and it's never going to change, I'll be like, okay, that's going to be faster in .NET, but that's about the extent of it.
Kind of as a last thing here, and I want to bring us all the way back to the beginning. And Daniel, I'm going to go to you first on this one, but give me the ideal situation, scenario, project for someone to go Ruby on Rails, open source, from the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think open source is generally, I'm going to say that's generally the way that you should go in general. I do think within that, it's a pretty wide landscape, and a lot of it depends upon what your project is, what your goals are with it. I think for your typical sort of SaaS startup where you're going to be primarily a web application, so something where people are going to go to your website, log in, use the tool. I think in general, Ruby on Rails is the direction that I'm gonna want to push most people to, for the reasons I've kind of been rambling on about this entire podcast here. I mean, I just think it's going to be the fastest way to build that application. I think it's going to be secure. I think it's going to be a really good choice. There's some separation there though, because it's important to keep track of everything I said there. If it's going to be a web-based application, so you're going on your web browser to the web application, you're creating a user account, you're creating a subscription, you're signing up, that would be the way I'd go. If you're going to be doing something that's much more of a mobile application, you're going to install this thing on your phone, and that's where 99% of the work is going to be done, is the user on their phone. Now you're going to have kind of two pieces to it. You're going to have one that's a mobile application, and then you're going to have an API somewhere. And, the mobile application there, I'm probably going to lean in favor of something like React Native, some kind of a cross-platform tool that you can compile out to multiple mobile applications. And the API piece gets to be a lot more dependent upon a lot of things. I think there are compelling arguments to try to do the API in Node or some kind of Node-based thing. Just for code base consistency, you're doing your React Native application in JavaScript. Now your backend is also in JavaScript. It makes it a little easier to kind of couple these things. So I'm not opposed to that. I do think Ruby on Rails can be a good choice there as well. In general, though, that might not be my first thought unless you're also going to have a web application where people are going to log in and do stuff. I think there's a lot of good candidates. The time when I would recommend .NET to somebody, for me, is going to be very limited to you are already working with .NET Microsoft technology. That would pretty much be the only time I would say build something new in .NET. If you're dealing with SQL Server databases, if you're dealing with legacy ASP applications and all of that, it might make sense to build it in .NET. For the most part, though, if it's new development, if you're building something new, I personally would not go the Microsoft route. I personally would go more the route of doing something open source.
Damon, you're smiling. So talk me into .NET.
I would take the opposite approach, or maybe think the decision point and shift it way over to the other side. Because if you're doing something really simple or need to stand up a prototype, I think that makes sense to do Ruby on Rails. You can do it really fast. I think I'm going to be mean here, but if you care about your data, then you need a
wow.
on the back
Those
end.
You care about your
fighting
data?
words.
Use SQL Server? SQL
Fighting
servers?
words.
All right.
No, not necessarily SQL Server, but I'm just talking about having a rigorous code base on the back end. I don't like having JavaScript, do business logic and system functions, especially with financial data and things like that. There's just too many little things that you could miss, and there is with every code. But I'm also biased. I most of my career has been .NET. It's where I came from. So as the architect and the person in charge of the design, .NET to me is much more natural to be able to control the code. I know I have a set of patterns that I'm using. So if somebody hires me, I'm also going to push to .NET because that's how I can build it in the best as well, just to be totally honest. But that being said, it's all about, like I said, it's all about the design. You can do good design and bad design with any technology.
Justin, closing thoughts?
Yeah, so I think one thing that makes .NET a little bit harder for small companies and SaaS founders is the added expense of running it, SQL servers and .NET. I guess I don't know if it's still true for .NET web services, but certainly for SQL Server, it requires a Windows install, which requires a Windows license. So you start pushing up your hosting costs kind of pretty quickly, pretty early, and that could be really hard for someone, for a company that's just trying to break even or get to a profitable month early on. And so maybe the answer is to re-implement.
I think it's gotten a lot cheaper with Azure, though. I think that's more of an old problem. I mean, Damon, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't really consider hosting all that much being that difference between .NET and Ruby.
You can have really inexpensive Microsoft databases in Azure, like $14 a month. They're
Yeah.
going to be slow, and they're not going to be, to get to like enterprise size, you're spending thousands a month. So you can go anywhere, but you also don't, just because you're .NET doesn't mean you're using Microsoft SQL. That's use any database you need, as long as that you can get a hold of the driver. So, and just one quick point on the expense. Now that .NET is open source, you can actually program for free in .NET. Visual Studio Code is free and open source. .NET framework is free. But the debugger isn't. The debugger is licensed. And a lot of the framework stuff, a lot of the packages we were talking about out of the box are also licensed. Visual Studio is licensed as well and paid for. So there are some costs, but it's cheaper than it used to be for sure.
Yeah, so this is a little bit old. It's been a while since I had to stand stuff up. But yeah, I was looking at clients hosting bills, and it's just like, oh, we have $500 a month in Windows licenses for what's not a giant application. And it's like, guys, this is killing your business. Like, it's so expensive. So I'm glad that they fixed that, because it was a real problem, and it's going to stop adoption.
Yeah, but I think the real expense with going .NET is not your hosting expense. It's your dev time. If it takes you 10 times as long to build the thing, I mean, that can be very expensive.
Well, I counterpoint to that, and if you design it right and build it right, like I said, the expense of a project is exponentially higher after implementation, and that's because it gets harder and harder to change. So the more things are coupled up, the more things are generated, the harder it is to change. Whereas if you put the investment in early to do good design, lay everything out in components, make sure that you understand what's going to change over time, then 5 years down the road, you're still able to be agile, basically.
I'd certainly say that pushing someone who's coming with a new project, they're going to get started if they want to start with something. This is a couple years old as well since I tinkered with this, but I was playing around with Elixir and their web framework, which I believe is called Phoenix. And I played around with Go and some emerging web frameworks for Go. And I was like, okay, cool, I want to get started. Now I have to write my own authentication system and password resets and all that. Like, if you're starting there, stop and then go with something that already has it out of the box, and .NET does, and so does Ruby on Rails. So yeah, they could both be good options. I think if you have a really great advisor who's pushing you one direction, you should probably take the advice of your advisor. Working with a really great team, you can be successful in a lot of technologies, but it's really hard to be successful with a bad team.
I guess, I mean, maybe if I could just kind of throw one little tail on there. I sort of feel like implementing something in .NET is a little closer to implementing it in Silicon. You're implementing something that's robust and stable, and that's maybe not the right call for somebody who's launching a startup. You don't necessarily know what your product is going to do 5 years from now. Maybe right now we should be trying to build this thing quickly, get some users, start getting some feedback on it. And, maybe 5 years down the road, once we've proven our business case and demonstrated, wow, we've got millions of users, now maybe is the time to think about rewriting it into something that's perhaps more robust.
That's definitely true. I think it all depends on what you need out of it and what the business needs out of it and how fast.
As much as the Rails community loves to harp on about testing as well and test-driven development, I think a type system probably makes testing somewhat easier. I imagine .NET also pushes you strongly to have tests for everything that you're writing, right?
You can talk about time to market. That's the first thing that drops off, though.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, that's most of the projects I work on. Like, no, there's no test bed. We don't have users yet. Once we have users, we'll start writing a test bed. But it's like, if you write your test bed too early, all you do is spend your life rewriting tests as the business requirements change. So, for early stage startups, I think, you put off unit testing till way down the road. Once you've solidified what the product is, then you build unit tests around it. But I think it just slows you down if you're just getting started.
Which is why rewrites are so wonderful, and we love rewriting. We love rewriting software. No, rewriting software is the best, because you know your product market fit, you know your business case, you know what your struggles are, the problems. You get to just start from scratch and re-implement something. It's like the best. Nothing better than a rewrite, man. They're my favorite.
That does kind of bring us to a close. So I do want to thank our guests. Daniel, who did have to just hop off. Really appreciate his insight, obviously. Damon, thank you so much for joining us. It has been an absolute pleasure. We will catch everyone next time on SaaS That App. Thanks for cruising along with us on SaaS That App. We hope you grabbed some insights that were inspiring, actionable, or at least entertaining.
If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.
Until next time, keep building, keep growing, and keep those apps sassy.